military and security companies as being something new, and they are indeed something growing, but they've been around, they have antecedents that have been around for a long time, including so-called detective companies, the Pinkertons, of course, who are still around as part of Securitas, one of the large multinational PMSCs, as well as other private mercenary groups. In recent years, there's been many mergers and acquisitions in this sector, as in many other sectors, giving the companies large geographic reach and great influence. They have very cozy relations with governments and a revolving door arrangement oftentimes, recruiting out of governments and out of militaries for their personnel.
There was a guy who was an advisor to a Republican senator. I forget the name of the senator, he just retired. And he was the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And he said to him what was interesting is, as he went to Iraq, every time he went to Iraq, all the people he ever interviewed, every single one of these military contractors that he met were pretty much divorced, and they were trying to keep up with their alimony, with their child support. So the people who went there generally untrained, generally poor, and desperate. So we're talking about, it's not necessarily that different from the people that we're drawing the soldiers from. And in fact, there's a lot of overlap. These are people who are poor and who need the money and will do what it takes. So this gives you a flavor of who these people are. Most of the people who work for Halliburton are actually not those poor Americans that I described who call me or immigrants. They're mostly people from Asia, from South Asia and Southeast Asia. They're from the Philippines, they're from India, and these are people who are paid anything from $100 a month. And I remember being in Kuwait, and because I'm half Indian, half Sri Lankan, I speak a couple of languages. So I speak Bengali, for example, and I talk to Bangladeshi workers, and I said, well, how much are you getting paid? And this is not a scientific survey, but I would wager that it's pretty accurate. That the salary started at $100 a month for janitors, and most people are paid something like $2,000 to a trafficker to get that job in Iraq. So they went to Iraq or Afghanistan because they wanted to, like the people who call me, because they thought they'd make a lot of money. Now, if you're not American, you're in the hands of a trafficker, the chances are pretty high you're not going to get paid what you think you might get, right? And in fact, since the Americans, in fact, were often paid through a subsidiary in the Middle East, so they couldn't get unemployment, they couldn't get health insurance. And the foreigners, of course, forget about all of that. At $100 a month, if you're paying $2,000 to get that job, it's going to take you 20 months of paying your entire salary to be able to pay off what it costs to get there.
There's a phenomenon that some people describe as double dipping, where, for instance, a company that makes mines also provides demining services. So the industry is kind of going full circle, providing destruction and reconstruction. The report that we published last year with the Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung basically found three main findings. One was that the United Nations is increasingly relying on private military and security companies for a wide range of services, which include armed, unarmed security, risk assessment, training, logistics, demining, as I was mentioning earlier. The one important thing to point out is that they're not using them as peacekeepers yet, although it's been proposed by some companies. They've drawn up plans to, yes, we can send 2,000 people and such conflict zones in 2 months, and propose these plans to the UN.
To begin by talking about one person in particular that we've been working with, whose life has been changed forever because of private military contractors. His name is Suhail Najim Abdullah al-Shamari. He was arrested by U.S. forces in Iraq in November of 2003. After his arrest, he was placed in a cage. He was threatened with death and with dogs, and then he was eventually transferred to Abu Ghraib prison, where he was held without charge. During his imprisonment at Abu Ghraib, he was subjected to electric shock during interrogations. He was hooded and beaten. He was deprived of food and sleep for extended periods of time. Again, threatened with dogs, stripped naked and kept in a cell naked, threatened with death, forced to watch another detainee be choked, and subjected to other forms of torture. He was held for 4 years without charge, and he was released without ever being charged. Now he lives in Baghdad and works as a farmer. Mr. al-Shamari was not alone. Throughout Iraq's detention centers that were under U.S. control, hundreds or even thousands of people were treated in this manner. Abu Ghraib was definitely one of the most notorious prison centers in Iraq, but this is definitely a pattern throughout Iraq's detention centers. And when the story of Abu Ghraib broke around the world, people were outraged. Some lower level officers in the military were subjected to court-martial, and some people served time. But a lesser-known aspect of what happened to Abu Ghraib is the role that private military contractors played. The military, after Abu Ghraib scandal broke, the military started some investigations into what had happened. Probably the biggest one was the Taguba. It's known as the Taguba investigation because the person who headed it up's last name was Taguba. But that investigation into the torture program found that contractors were involved in war crimes and acts of torture at the prison. And one company is called Khaki International, and it was in charge of the interrogation program at Abu Ghraib and actually ordered this kind of abuse, ordered soldiers to so-called soften people up. And so, I mentioned that some lower-level soldiers have gone through court-martial and gone through the military justice system because of what happened, but not one contractor has been prosecuted for the abuse at Abu Ghraib or any of the detention centers, despite all these investigations that have shown their involvement. And I think that it really takes place within this context of just the Bush and then the Obama Department of Justice essentially letting all the architects and conspirators of post-9/11 torture programs off the hook. I mean, you have Abu Ghraib, but as many people in this room know, I imagine, this post-9/11 torture program is very widespread, and there's been very, very little accountability. And so this really takes place within that context. It's just opened this spring in Philadelphia, and Khaki is a key player in that. And so you really just see these companies without ever having to be held to be held accountable for these acts of torture, for running intelligence gathering at Abu Ghraib. Now they're still making billions of dollars, and they're moving into kind of domestic surveillance. It's really, really concerning.